Hey everybody, today I'm gonna take this beautiful picture from Sangram and I'm gonna turn it into a very dramatic and very dark photo like this, while of course explaining every single step I do from start to finish. So I played around with this picture before recording with all kind of different settings, and there would be like this kind of look roughly, which is my standard look, but I really don't think it gives this picture justice, and there's a much better look that I want to do here. So let's get started. I'm gonna bring down the highlight so I retrieve all of this detail in the clouds, and then instead of bringing up the shadows, I'm just gonna leave it at 0 and bring the contrast to the right so we really give a nice punch to this picture, and I think it works really well. So the idea here is to really get kind of a path of light flowing through this picture, but keeping these hills and maybe some of that foreground very dark, so we really get a lot of dramatic lighting in this photo. Then let's go on with the whites, and I'm gonna bring them up just a little bit to make sure you don't clip them. You can see that kind of mask by holding down the Alt key, and whenever something starts to get any other color than black, that means that the portion there is clipped and it's just pure white. I'm not going to worry about, a very small part that much, but you just want to make sure that you don't make it look something like this, of course. So I'm going to bring it up just a little bit here, and the blacks. By bringing down the blacks, you add an additional contrast, a very harsh contrast, in addition to making stuff darker. So if you just want to make, the dark areas darker, then just go down with the shadows. And this is actually the thing I think I'm gonna do here, because by bringing down the blacks, it really exaggerates the texture in the entire picture way too much for my likings. So I'm just gonna leave it at 0 and bring the shadows a little bit down. So that way, from before to after, we already get, this kind of dramatic look, and we get this differentiation from very bright to medium bright to very dark. Then let's go on. Clarity is a very difficult thing in quite a lot of the pictures, but don't be afraid to go minus clarity. For example, I think it might even work a little bit better by just going a little bit into a minus here, because it kind of softens everything. Definitely do not want to go into the plus here, because once again it really brings out the texture way too much for my taste. Then before I go to the vibrance and saturation, color temperature is a very important thing, and here it's very difficult. I actually kind of like this very artistic warm look like this, but at the end, I think I'm gonna go for a very neutral kind of look, maybe just add a little bit of tint though, and keep it like this. It's a little bit towards the warms, but I think overall it's pretty neutral, and then later go into the split toning and maybe add a little bit of differentiation in terms of the color there. But before I do that, let's go on with the basics adjustment and with the vibrance. I think this green, I'm actually considering going down into the minus with the vibrance here. Yeah, I think there's just a little bit too much vibrance and saturation for the overall picture, so let me bring that down. Vibrance generally tends to decrease or increase color a little bit more naturally than the saturation tool, so I'm just gonna bring down the vibrance slider here. Then tonal curve is another very important thing, and the thing I like to do here is just bring up the highlight slider, and that way you really get a lot of dynamic in your photo, especially in the clouds, but also sometimes on the foreground elements. So you see here from before to after, it really makes the light shine through, and I think it works really well. Then the rest of these sliders, just play around with it. A very important thing here is that you don't really care about the actual exposure, but much rather about the look and the kind of dynamic it adds to your photo, because for example, if I like this look a lot better, I can always very easily grab a graduated filter and then bring down the exposure for the sky, while still remaining that overall dynamic. But I'm just gonna bring it up a little bit in this case and play around with the rest. I don't think I have to go too far down into the darks, because I'm gonna add some vignetting a little bit later. but let's just adjust these sliders regardlessly, and point curve would be a very fine sort of contrast that I especially like to use in cityscape pictures, but not so much in landscapes. So let's just keep it there. HSL tool, I am actually going to cover it in this tutorial, and here you could just go to hue, saturation and luminance separately, grab this little pinpointer and go over a color you want to change in your photo. Now this will only adjust a very rough color, so if you have green in your picture, you have green there. It won't really change any different shades of greens, and you know, of course the same with any other colors, but in this case I really think there's only green pretty much in this photo. So let's just play around with it, even if I end up not liking anything. And I actually think I'm gonna bring it a little bit down here, because that makes everything look a little bit more natural. That is almost a little bit poisonous how it was before, and I think I like this a lot better. Of course you could go into the extremes and change the look completely, but that is not what I want here. So then saturation, let's go also over the saturation with the greens. Don't really have to worry about it too much, because I already adjusted the vibrance beforehand, but you know, once again, if you would have multiple colors and you just want to adjust the saturation of one color but not the other, then that is definitely a great thing. And luminance, that way you can sometimes add a little bit of dynamic or decrease and make everything a little bit more flat and dramatic in some cases. So, you know, play around with it, stick with whatever works best, but I think I'm just gonna leave it at 0 here. So then let's go down to the split toning, and as I mentioned before, I wanted to try out some different looks with the highlights here, but I am actually not sure if anything is going to work, because this is such a, you know, evenly lit picture and not very colorful except for the greens, so I really don't know if it works. I really love this tool in sunset, sunrise pictures, but once again, here I am not very sure. If I want any color, then I definitely think it's gonna be sort of a yellowish color like this, and does it work? I think it doesn't really. I mean, it's up to you if you like that kind of look, but personally, I think I'm just gonna bring the saturation down to 0. You know, sometimes in split toning you can get a very nice look, but other times it just ends up not working all that well. Then detail tool down here, I've got plenty of tutorials where I talk about this, but since this is a viewer edit and it's really just about the overall look, I'm not gonna change anything here. Lens corrections, also not gonna do anything here. But then effects tool is definitely something that can sometimes help your picture greatly by just adding some vignetting. That way you get more attention towards the center and you make everything look a lot more dramatic. So from before to after here, I'm not really sure about this value, but I think I'm gonna go quite far, because I really once again want to make this part relatively dark and really just have kind of a pathway of light here in the middle. So let's just play around with it to make sure I have everything to where I like it. Sometimes I prefer to add vignetting with the adjustment brush because I have more control over it in every single corner, but for this picture I really like the look of it in every single corner. So from before to after really makes a very dramatic difference here. And camera calibration would be the last thing, and here you could play around with the primary colors. Doesn't really have that big of a difference, so I'm just gonna leave it out to keep the video kind of short. Then we're done with the global adjustments, and the local adjustments are definitely where the fun part is. So let's just look at the picture for a second and see if there's any further vignetting needed. And I actually think I'm gonna grab a graduated filter for that, and I'm just gonna drag it over the foreground like this. And I'm gonna bring down the exposure by quite a lot. Once again, wanna make this very dramatic, and just exaggerate the vignetting here in the foreground. So let's try with the same thing with the sky as well, and just bring down the exposure here. It sometimes can work, in some cases it doesn't, but you know, that's the great thing about Lightroom. You can just play around with all sorts of different adjustments, and if it works, then great, and if it doesn't work, just click delete. But once again, I think it really works to even exaggerate this vignetting in just some portions a bit more. So here would be before any graduated filters, and here is after. So then, is there anything else I want to do before that and burning? I think, I mean, in terms of the overall look, I really do like this photo very much. Maybe I'm just gonna zoom in here, grab a spot removal tool and get rid of this bright thing right here. Just like this. Just want to make sure that you're on heal and not on clone, because you see clone, it just clones another area and it just doesn't look good. So on heal it should look a lot better. Maybe sometimes you have to right click select new source to really get a nice spot that fits the actual place right here. And yeah, I think this works pretty well. Then let's zoom out again, and I really think there's nothing left to be done except for the dodge and burning. So let's start with that here. I really like the radial filter for dodge and burning. You could do it with the adjustment brush as well, but I really like the radial filter because you have so much individual control over each and every single filter. So dodge and burning is just making individual parts darker and brighter to really get more dynamic, to complexify the lighting, and to overall add a lot of interest. I've made a complete tutorial about dodge and burning, a link in the description, but I'm just gonna start with some plus exposure here. Always want to make sure that the feather is to 100, and I'm just gonna add a little bit of interest, a little bit of plus exposure in some parts that are kind of hit by light and others that are just kind of flat. So let's just add a relatively big one right here, angle it correctly, and just make this part a little bit brighter. Now you can also mix this with color. For example here, I think I'm just gonna add a little bit of warmth to really make the effect look even stronger. Then right click duplicate, maybe this hill right here could use a little bit more lighting as well. And with dodge and burning, the most important thing is that you always want to go with the lighting scheme, because you don't, for example, want to go into a very dark area and just increase the exposure, because that will not end up looking any good. Instead, you just want to go over the already bright spots and just kind of exaggerate that look and create a lot of dynamic and a lot of interest by doing that. So let's right click duplicate, add a few filters over here, make it a little bit faster. Right click duplicate again. You can also use that in the sky to make, for example, a cloud a little bit more interesting. So let's do that right here, maybe not quite as far. Right click duplicate, maybe just in this path right there. Make a pretty big one actually, and make it look as if there was kind of a light ray hitting on this scene right here. And you know, at the end you always want to make sure that you don't overdo it, but as long as you don't do it too much, it will end up really just benefiting your picture. So let's finish that up with the plus exposure here, maybe just making some of these treetops a little bit more interesting. Another one over there, right click duplicate over here, and maybe a last one right there on this field. So from before to after, we already created a lot of additional interest, a lot of additional dynamic, but I'm actually not done yet. I'm also gonna add some minus exposure radial filters and just kind of place them in the already dark spots. So you see, for example, here the light is kind of hitting on the left side of this hill, and by just bringing a minus exposure on the other side, you really exaggerate that look even more. So right click duplicate, maybe one in between here. I don't think I'm gonna have to add too many minus exposure radial filters, because the picture is already pretty dark and pretty dramatic, but let's just add a few more to add additional shading, make everything more interesting once again, and maybe one over this vegetation and just make this part a little bit darker. So maybe a last one over there, a pretty big one actually, and make this just look a lot more dramatic. So yeah, here is before any plus and negative exposure rail filters, and here is after. Really creates a lot of additional interest and a lot of additional dynamic in your photo. I might have just gone a little bit too far with this one right here. So this is also why I love the radial filters, because you can just go back to one single radial filter and then adjust the values there without any effect on any other radial filters. So yeah, I think that is definitely a really great plus compared to the adjustment brush. So let's see, I think I'm pretty much done here. I always like to take a last look at the picture before I really say that I'm done. And maybe I'm actually gonna grab a graduated filter and drag it over the entire rough portion of the sky right here and just kind of decrease the saturation, because I think there was just a little bit too much orange and purple tones in the sky, and by bringing down the exposure I think it looks a lot more pleasing, so from before to after. But I really think that I'm done here, so let's go here into the history and see where we started at. And I mean, World of Difference looks a lot more flat, a lot more evenly lit, which can be a good or bad thing. But personally, for this picture, I really love this look. I really think it works greatly with this very dramatic sky, these clouds, and the already pretty dramatic lighting scheme. So of course keep in mind that this is just one look of many different that you could go for. You could also go with a black and white look, or you could go not quite as far as I have done with the kind of minus exposure in some parts. You know, at the end it's just all up to you. But for me, I really like this look the best. So I hope you all enjoyed this video and you at least could take away some tips or techniques from it. Once again, thank you very much Sangram for submitting this beautiful picture. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't done so already for more videos just like this one, and I hope you have a great day, take care, and see you in the next episode.